podcast. My name is Jack McLean, and today I'm lucky enough to be joined by Josh Ruddy, the head of sports science at the Essendon Football Club. Our topic for today's chat will be everything you need to know when it comes to decision making and being informed with data from a sports science point of view and how it drives AFL success. For those that are tuning in live, whether you're on LinkedIn, YouTube, feel free to use the comment section below, and no doubt we'll find some time throughout the show to answer your questions. But welcome, Josh. Really looking forward to our chat, mate. Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me. Good to be on, mate.
No doubt the sports scientists, S&Cs, those working in the AFL will be well aware of your background, mate. But for those tuning in that aren't aware, I guess take us back to the start. Where did you discover your passion for sports science, sort of strength and conditioning, high performance sport, and take us through your journey so far?
Yeah, mate. So it feels like a long time ago now, but I did an undergrad degree in exercise and sports science at ACU, so Australian Catholic University. I think I might have started that in 2012, and sort of got towards the end of that degree, and like a lot of students just sort of wondered what was next. I quite enjoyed the research units that we did at the time, and thought I'd go on and do my honours degree. Did my honours year and looked at, we were lucky enough to work with a couple of different AFL clubs that year, and basically collect some GPS data from them, and we essentially looked at the association between running exposure and the risk of hamstring injury in elite Australian footballers. So that was probably where I really started to develop a passion for sports science, but more specifically data and dealing with big data. So towards the end of that, decided to go on and do a PhD. And PhD, lucky enough to do that in conjunction with the Melbourne Football Club. So I spent a little bit of time there as a sports science assistant, and we looked at predictive modelling of lower limb soft tissue injuries using data that's sort of routinely collected by AFL clubs. And sort of got towards the end of that. Really enjoyed my time in elite sport, but I was quite interested in further developing my data science skills. So I took on a role with Vold in a data science and sort of sports science capacity, and spent 2.5 years there. That was during the COVID years. So had a lot of time at the desk, upskilling in terms of data science, sports science. Really enjoyed my time there, but towards the back end of that, I got the itch again. Really wanted to jump back into elite sport. So the opportunity came up to join Essendon, and yeah, I've been here for about 4 years now.
Fantastic. Yeah, great range from the different realms of working with data and technology to research and of course high performance sport. For sports scientists looking, maybe starting their degree, do you feel like working for a company like Vold or companies where you, I guess, getting regular exposure to different tech helps set you up?
Yeah, mate, absolutely. I think my time spent at Vold, it was a fantastic opportunity. Really enjoyed my time there. And I mean, essentially, I got to do basically what I do today as a sports scientist at Essendon Footy Club. I was essentially doing similar stuff at Vol, but getting to work with a really wide array of data, and getting to consult with clients from all over the world. So I'd be on calls with practitioners working in the EPL, the NFL at a college level, just a really wide array of practitioners working in different sports. And so, conversing with them, hearing from them how they operate, how they practice was really valuable for me. So it would be something that I would highly recommend. I think a lot of people studying exercise and sports science, the goal is to work in elite sport, but I don't think you necessarily have to jump into that straight away. Taking that opportunity with potentially a sports tech company or something similar can be a really good pathway.
And PhD, mate, that big feat. What sort of stirred you on there to dive into what's probably one of the more challenging academic pursuits you can do?
Yeah, mate, it was challenging. It was a long 3 years, but I was lucky enough to have a fantastic supervisory team in Professor David Opar, who's now the head of the Sprint Research Centre out at ACU. Also, Dr. Ryan Timmons and Professor Stuart Cormack as well. So they were my primary supervisors. So I had a really good support team around me. And I guess at the time, I was just really interested in research and specifically sort of injury risk mitigation. I guess that was where my interests lied at the time. Um, and, I was lucky enough to have Dave Opar as a mentor. And I remember he sat me down very early days and said, look, this is the topic that you're interested in. So we can go down this pathway and we can explore it through research. But he's a very forward thinking individual and he's got a very excellent grasp on the current landscape in terms of exercise and sports science. And he sat me down and said to me, I think it's going to be really valuable for you if you learn these data science skills and you actually teach yourself how to code. He saw that becoming a really valued and employable skill set down the line, and it honestly has. So it wasn't necessarily something that I had flagged myself, not necessarily something I wanted to invest a lot of time in at that point. But I'm really glad I did because these days it's my bread and butter. I spend a lot of time working with data, coding, and I absolutely love it. Yeah, I was really lucky that I got the opportunity to sort of learn that skill set through my PhD as well. So I had plenty of time teaching myself to code and dealing with really big data as well.
Big 3 years learning a skill
Yeah,
set like
big three
coding and
years. Yeah.
PhD. But yeah, no doubt paying dividends now. For on that topic with future sports scientists, what would be probably a little bit off topic to talk about today, but yeah, that was obviously pretty impactful in your career and still something that's helping you today. What do you feel like is your future for sports scientists? If you're talking to the next generation in terms of skill set, is it, I imagine coding still a fundamental. Is there anything else that you and also sports technology, but anything else that you think might be out there worth pursuing or looking into?
Yeah, I think fundamentally you need the foundation. You need the theoretical underpinning. Um, so, going through that process and going through an undergrad degree, learning those foundations is really important. But it's funny because I see a lot of people and I hear a lot of people and on LinkedIn and Twitter, they're almost ranting saying, sports science, it's not about big data, it's not about technology, it's about working with athletes, getting to know them, and basically impacting decision making. And to that extent, I absolutely agree. That's probably one of the foundations of sports science. Working with the athlete. Ultimately, our job is to impact decision making. But we're living in 2025. We're living in the age of AI, and absolutely, sports science is becoming about big data, working with technology, and I think having the ability, having that data science skill set, and having the ability to work with big complex data sets is going to become more and more important in the sports science realm. So, I get interns come through the club and work with me, and one of the first things I say to them is start learning how to code. Start learning those data science skills, because whether you want to be a sports scientist or whether you want to be an S&C coach, I think being able to work with data and being able to do that really efficiently through programs like R or Python is really valuable. It's a really employable skill set. I'm not necessarily sure we're at a point where a sports scientist needs to know how to code to do their job effectively. But as data continues to grow and become more complex, I think we will get to that point pretty soon.
And what about significant challenges, mate, that you faced so far? What are sort of problems that you face that you've had to navigate and I guess stretch your sort of practice, but ultimately you've become a better coach, better scientist from facing those challenges.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, on a very regular basis, I face a lot of technical challenges. We work with GPS data quite a lot, and that presents a lot of technical challenges. All the data that we collect, you're going to find challenges within that. But I guess me personally, from a career perspective, one of the biggest challenges I sort of faced was nearing the end of my PhD. As I mentioned earlier, I was lucky enough to spend some time at the Melbourne Football Club. And at the time, I was relatively young. I was pretty introverted. And as you would know, Jack, like footy clubs can be very high energy environments. And I sort of started to question whether it was the right environment for me. And so even towards the back end of a PhD, I was really questioning what I wanted to do, where to go, and how to get there. And I think a lot of people sort of face that challenge when they get towards the end of, even their undergrad degree. And I really enjoyed research at the time. And so I decided that I wanted to do some lecturing and do some research at a university. So I started applying for academic positions. And I might have had 3 or 4 interviews over the space of maybe 6 months at different universities. And I would get down to maybe the final couple of candidates, but I was unsuccessful in all of them. And that was a bit of a blow for me because I felt like I was a really solid applicant for those roles. And that's where I kind of did a bit of a 180 and ended up spending 2.5 years at Vold, which for me was incredibly valuable. So I guess the lesson for me at the time was it was challenging to kind of go through that process. But I think what it taught me is sometimes to just, it sounds a bit cliche, but just go with the flow. A lot of people want to end up in elite sport and they want to get there instantly, but it doesn't necessarily happen that way. Sometimes you might uh, you might think you're not supposed to be somewhere, but um, that might be a really good opportunity, and you should definitely take what you can from every opportunity you get. And wherever you want to end up, there's always a pathway, and everyone's pathway looks very different. So yeah, I guess for me that was probably the challenge, and I wasn't sure. I wanted to get back into elite sport, but it was certainly the right decision, and I've landed somewhere where I'm really happy and I really enjoy my work.
Well said, mate. Yeah, I think they'll resonate with a lot of listeners, no matter where they're at with their journey. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Once you get into that pointy end of finishing a degree, you want to make sure that it's justified. Going back to ultimately setting yourself up for something that you started the degree for, whatever that might be. So there's a little bit of angst and pressure that goes along with that. But yeah, I guess trusting the journey, as long as you put your best foot forward, no matter what the role is, you're going to get some great skill sets out of it and experiences, and meet some great people. So it
Yeah,
definitely
that's
sets you up the right
exactly
way.
it, mate. Yeah, definitely.
And what about highlights so far? What springs front of mind that you're most proud of, and best
Yeah.
experiences so far?
Yeah, mate, there's been plenty of highlights. So I guess I was really lucky to do a fair bit of travel during my PhD, and I presented some of my research at some really big international conferences. But probably the highlights from some of those trips are getting to visit some really high-end, elite sporting organizations. So I've spent some time at, the Denver Broncos, Seattle Seahawks, Notre Dame University, but probably for me, one of the highlights was spending a week out at Arsenal with Darren Burgess. He was there at the time. Um, I'm a big sports nuffy, like a lot of people that work in elite sports. So not only was it really cool to actually spend time at these organizations, tour the facility, see the athletes training, go to some of the games. But for me, what was really valuable at the time is actually spending time talking to practitioners that, are working at the pinnacle of elite sport, and hearing about their journeys, how they got there, how they operate, their philosophies. And, for me, that was really impactful. And going back to the conversation we just had around, career progression and those different pathways, I think for me, it sort of stoked a bit of a desire to one day end up in elite sport, and to be working, at the pointy end of sport, particularly in Australia. Um, And I guess specific to football, I'm lucky enough to work at a big AFL club with a storied history, and we get exposed to a lot here at Essendon Football Club. We play in some really big games, but I don't think from a highlights perspective, for me, nothing will beat standing out on the MCG on Anzac Day, hearing the national anthem. And the best part about that is I get to call it work. So I would certainly flag that as a really big highlight for me. I've done 3 Anzac Day games now, and always look forward to it, always get goosebumps.
Yeah, it's amazing, really. Like any given day is almost one person's dream to experience that one day. So
It is,
yeah,
yeah.
but
Every time every game, every time we step out onto that field, and you're working, as I said, you're working at, the pinnacle of elite sport in Australia. It's that's a highlight in and of itself. So, yeah, there's plenty to enjoy, and plenty to look back on fondly.
fantastic. Great segue, mate, for our topic. I guess to introduce it, how has data changed over the last, you mentioned AEST, and obviously for the last 4 years? Like, how do you feel AFL clubs are managing data, going into 2026, and how has that sort of evolved over the last sort of decade, or more recently, the last sort of 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, it's interesting, Matt. I think clearly, like the data that we collect and how we go about collecting it, it just continues to evolve significantly. And like a good example of that, in more recent times, even is like force decks. So we used to measure, standing vertical reach using the old Vertex system. So you jump and kind of knock the discs away, and that would be your jump height. And in fact, I think they might even still do that at the draft combine. I'm not sure. But, you look at force decks now, you do a simple counter movement jump test and you get in excess of 100 metrics from that. And, the counter movement jump is one of 50 plus tests that you can now do on force decks. So, we just have this expanse of data available to us, and force decks is one example. But we might think that this is fantastic. Technology is evolving, data is evolving. We have access to all this information, and it is fantastic. But to an extent, it's also made elements of our job a lot more difficult. So now there is a significant amount of noise that we need to wade through in order to find meaningful signal. And we need to do that at a group level, so at a squad level, but we also need to do that at an individual level as well. So what's meaningful for you might not be meaningful for me as an individual athlete. So I think there's elements of data evolving and technology evolving that it's obviously fantastic and has improved what we do, but it's also presented some challenges as well. But I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really change how we operate. So how we approach data, how we interact with it, how we summarize it, and how we present those outputs ultimately hasn't changed too much. And at the end of the day, our job is to take that really complex information. As I said, we need to wade through the noise, find meaningful signal. We need to summarize that really simply, and we need to use that to impact decision making. That's our job as sports scientists, as S&C coaches and high performance managers. So yeah, data has certainly evolved. I think specifically in the AFL. One of the things that I'm seeing more and more of, and this is certainly happening and has been happening, but it's probably more collaboration between coaches, performance analysts or football analysts, and sports scientists and S&C coaches. So I think traditionally they've been a little siloed, but now I think more and more we're seeing collaboration. We're seeing that gap being bridged. The gap between physical performance. So, we're talking about like GPS outputs, and on-field tactical performance. So, as I said, it's certainly already happening. A lot of people are doing some really cool work in that space, but I do think we're going to see more and more of that. because, from a high performance perspective, we might look at our GPS output post a match, and we might say, okay, this athlete's had 10 sprint efforts in this game. So therefore, that's going to impact what his week looks like from a loading perspective moving forwards. A coach doesn't care about that. They want to contextualize those 10 sprint efforts. So why did the athlete need to sprint? When did it occur in the game? Where was the ball? Where was the opposition? Putting context to those physical output metrics, I think, is going to become really important. So, eventually, I think we're going to break down those silos and those barriers entirely. And, a sports scientist won't be traditionally just working with the high performance team, looking at the health and the wellness of the athletes. They'll be working with the football analysts as well. And we'll be utilizing GPS data to assess performance as well as physical output.
Going back to sports tech, obviously you've been exposed to a range of different sports tech, like you mentioned earlier, around the world. If you were to start a footy club with, unlimited sort of budget, what would be the most important for an AFL club, do you think? With obviously GPS, but it's 1080s out there. If limitless money, what would you like to have for your top 5?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had a demo of the 1080 Sprint 2 a couple of weeks ago, and I'd love 10 of them. But I think unfortunately they're pretty expensive, and we've got a pretty tight soft cap here in the AFL, so we can't have everything. But yeah, unlimited resources. It's interesting. It's probably a difficult question to answer succinctly, but I'd love access to an array of technology. But I also probably wouldn't go overboard with different bits and pieces because, it kind of goes back to my point before. There's already so much noise. And, I think for me, what's really important is defining what your big rocks are. So what's really important to impact our playing group and to impact decision making, what's really important, and what's the technology that's going to help us collect that data that's going to inform decision making. So we obviously touched on GPS. I'm not going to sit here and say GPS is absolutely essential in this modern age, but it's certainly useful, and we utilize it every single day. So that's an important one. But there's some really cool tech out there. I think I'm a little bit biased because I spent 2.5 years working at Vold, but their suite of technology is just phenomenal. And the integration that we get, being able to collect a heap of different data across a heap of different systems, and then log into Vold Hub and it all live in the one place is just amazing. And I don't think there's any company out there that can really beat that at the moment. But yeah, in terms of that, I guess moving into the future, this is interesting point, but I think AI integration, it's frightening. AI is scary, but it's also really exciting. And I can't really sit here today and tell you how AI is going to shape high performance sport in the future. All I know is it'll drastically change what we do, how we do it, and hopefully for the better. I think a lot of people sort of often joke with me and say that AI is going to take my job down the track, which I don't think is going to happen, not for a long time anyway. But ultimately the game is played by human beings, and they need human beings to look after them. And to manage them and to monitor them. So AI is not going to replace that, but I think what it will do is make our jobs significantly easier. So regardless of what technology you bring into a football club, I think, in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, AI is going to play a massive part of what we do, how we do it.
You talked a little bit around your research earlier in terms of injury mitigation, obviously a clear passion of yours. I guess, from a sports science point of view, what are some of your non-negotiables when working at a footy club and putting in processes in place around screening, load monitoring, for those looking to work in the sport of AFL that may perhaps haven't seen it before? Yeah, what are some of the big rocks for a sports scientist in that space?
Yeah, I guess for us, and it's a renewed focus for us this year in particular. But from a lower limb soft tissue injury standpoint, I think one of the most important things we can do is expose our athletes to high speeds. And so, obviously there's a bit of a U-shaped relationship there where if we do too little, that's going to increase an athlete's risk of lower limb soft tissue injury. If we do too much, there's the capacity to tip them over the edge. And we might see an injury from too much high speed running or sprinting. Um, but for me, a big rock is making sure that our athletes are exposed to high velocities every single week. Um, and there's I think what's interesting is it's a very individualized approach, and you need to work out what an athlete's tipping point is and make sure that you can get them to that point, and maintain that throughout preseason and throughout the season as well. Um, so that's a really key focus for us. It's one of our big rocks. And I guess if we start talking specific pathologies, so something like hamstring injury risk, one thing that we find really informative is getting ultrasound assessment. So looking at muscle architecture in terms of biceps femoris long head. So one of my PhD supervisors, Dr. Ryan Timmons, his PhD looked at that and the relationship that biceps femoris long head fascicle length has with the risk of prospective hamstring injury. And so we find assessing that, measuring our athletes' fascicle length is quite informative for us, not so much from an injury risk standpoint, but what it does tell us is how they're responding to the program that we have in place. So if there's guys that are shorter than we expect, what that tells us is that the exercises that we have in place might not be the best exercises for that individual, and that they might just need a little bit of variety in their program because, strength and conditioning, it's not a one size fits all approach. There's some athletes that will respond very differently to the same exercise. So I guess for us, that's also been one of our big rocks in recent times, and assessing that at multiple time points, over the course of the season. But yeah, I guess from that, just really, speaking a little bit more broadly, but having those screening and having those load monitoring strategies in place, and having really clear guidelines and clear heuristics that everyone in your team is across. So for us, we have some really clear rules. So, as a basic example, if an athlete doesn't hit their groin squeeze target on a Monday morning, we have a really clear process off the back of that athlete's going to follow. And everyone in our team is across that. And so that's something that we will follow. So I feel like if your process off the back of screening and load monitoring is a little bit arbitrary, you don't necessarily have those rules or those heuristics in place, that's where it loses its effectiveness, essentially, if that makes sense.
And building out those processes as a team, is that so that anyone in the sports science, medical, strength and conditioning department can take that athlete through that process and observe that they're doing the program correctly?
Yeah, definitely. But I also think it's when, if we go through a process whereby, say, we need to modify an athlete's session on that particular day because, they might have a couple of screening flags, or they might have some load monitoring flags. When we take that to the high performance manager and to the coaches, they have a really clear understanding of why that needs to happen, or why we're suggesting that happens, because we've been through this process. They understand the process, and those rules, those heuristics, they're in place. Everyone's across it. So I think that's the importance of having those systems and those workflows built out, and making sure that everyone is across it. It just makes those conversations easier. So it's a really easy conversation to have when you explain that this athlete, they've had a flag on this, they've had a flag on this, and I think that being really conscious that sometimes sports science is known for like people feel like sports scientists they hold back, they restrict. We're going to pull an athlete out of training because they've got these load monitoring flags. I don't think that's the case at all. Sometimes that's necessary, and sometimes that's the best thing for an athlete. And I don't like to think of it so much as load monitoring, but more like performance optimization. So we're doing it for a very good reason. But I also think a sports scientist's job from that perspective, when an athlete flags on their wellness or they flag on their screening, it can actually be off the back of that, there can actually be additions. So some of our processes, rather than modify an athlete in training, what it will be is that they'll just have maybe some additional recovery prescribed after the session, or some treatment with a physio, or they might speak to the dietitian and renew their nutrition plan. So it's not always pulling an athlete out of training, restricting them. Sometimes it's also additions that, again, it's going to optimize their performance.
And I guess that collaboration piece that you talked about, what are some of the biggest challenges for departments to, not work in silos and collaborate and be data informed? I guess that collective message between tactical coaches, analysts, sports scientists, performance coaches, S&Cs.
Yeah, I guess probably one of the biggest challenges is something that I just touched on around coaches not understanding the systems, the workflows, the processes that operate behind the scenes. If we need to modify an athlete's training, I think it's really important that the coach and the coaches have a good understanding of why that's occurring. And why that's necessary, and if they see all the work that goes, that goes on in the background in terms of those systems and those workflows, it's easy for them to digest. If you operate in silos, and coaches and analysts and other people within a football department don't really know what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it. It makes having those conversations between departments much more difficult. So, I think breaking down those walls, breaking down those silos, having open, honest communication, and being really transparent with what you do and how you do it, I think that overcomes most of the hurdles that you typically might face within a elite sporting organisation.
And going back to AI, what do you feel is most exciting in this space in terms of where it's going to help you? From a tool
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and to be honest, I feel like I've actually been a bit of a slow adopter of AI. I think there's some really fantastic people out there working in sport that are utilizing AI in some really cool ways. But for me, I guess AI is just absolutely improving my efficiency in terms of how I go about day to day. As an example, might have a conversation with a coach. They might want to see a new report or a new dashboard that's providing them with some really important information. And normally that would take someone a little while to knock up. And I'd spend a bit of time in R coding, building that. But now, platforms like Chat GPT, you can basically just plug in a bit of a prompt, tell Chat GPT what you need, and it will give you a skeleton. It will give you a really good framework that you can then take and adapt. And having that framework, having that skeleton, rather than having to build it yourself from scratch, it might save me a couple of hours during the week, and those are hours that I can then invest back into, spending time with the high performance manager, looking at data, uncovering those insights. So for me, that's been how I've slowly started integrating AI into my workflow. But I think its power is probably limitless at this point. But yeah, I would say I'm far from an AI expert, and as I said earlier, I'm not necessarily sure how it's going to shape the high performance sport landscape. But I think it definitely will. It will change it drastically.
Yeah. Yeah. And last one, mate, on the topic before we start to wrap it up. I guess, when you've got in high performance sport, it's pretty transient. There's a fair amount of change in leadership positions. When going through changes as a sports scientist, do you sort of stick to your processes? Do you look to adapt it to suit, whether it be your manager or a new coach, tactical coach? How do you sort of go about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think anyone that sort of follows AFL will know that Essendon had a pretty horror 2025, and at the end of the season, I was, really sad to see some good people leave the football club and some good friends as well. But I guess the flip side of that is that we have had a new high performance manager come in. And we've also had a new strength and conditioning coach come in. And they've brought some fantastic ideas, some fantastic philosophies with them. And I guess, working with the same group of people for a long time, you can become pretty complacent, pretty comfortable with your workflows, your processes. So having someone new come in and assess that, and even challenge it to an extent is really good, and it's really exciting as well. It's actually been a really fantastic opportunity for me to reflect, look at my own workflows, my own systems, my own processes, and really ask myself, where can I improve, where can I get better? And I guess, a specific example, new high performance manager comes in, might want to look at some slightly different GPS metrics. And that's happened for us this season. But the metrics that we're now looking at are really well justified. There was very good reason for wanting to shift those metrics slightly, but ultimately, I think, you said, do you stick to your process? And for me, absolutely, I stick to the process in terms of, some of our velocity bands might have shifted slightly, but, at the end of the day, the big rocks remain the same. Specifically talking about GPS data, we've got, our 4 or 5 key metrics that represent the facets of, the game and the physical demands of the game, and how we look at those big rocks, how we interpret the data, and how we utilize it doesn't change, and it won't change. Maybe just some of the numbers and how we interpret them to an extent might shift slightly. But yeah, going back to new faces coming in. As I said, it's been really exciting for us, and it's presented a fantastic opportunity to reflect on what we've done. And we always reflect. I mean, in high performance sport, Jack, you reflect every single day on what you've done, what could you have done better, and what worked really well. And so we constantly do that. But having a fresh set of eyes, a fresh perspective, it's really useful, and yeah, really exciting. So looking forward to more of that throughout 2026.
So, mate, yeah, well said. Yeah, I think it resonates with my mindset around it as well. I think the unknown is never easy for anyone, but then once you get stuck into it, different perspectives, different principle or different methods, and is an awesome opportunity to learn and get better as coaches and just start to see the world maybe in a slightly different lens. It can only make you a better coach and better practitioner. So
Yeah, that's absolutely
awesome,
right. Yeah.
very good. Well, there's a fair amount of info in there for anyone that's just tuned in. Make sure to wind back to the start. These last few questions are professional based, but a little bit off topic, mate. Work life pet peeves, anything that sort of fires you up?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good one. Mate, there's plenty as a sports scientist. So probably one of the biggest ones in keeping this relatively light-hearted is, when the boys don't return their GPS units to me at the end of training and I need to go into the change rooms hunting for them. But, that frustrates me. But lucky enough that we've got a really good group. It actually doesn't happen too often. And I think little things like that, building that into your culture, I think, making sure that you return equipment, that you respect all the staff members. I think that sort of stuff's really important for building a sustainable, successful, elite culture. So yeah, when it's often some of the younger boys that that have come in. They'll take their GPS unit into the change room with them, and you tell them a couple of times, and then they learn pretty quickly. Particularly from our older boys, from our leaders, they instill that pretty quickly in our group. So. But yeah, I guess more from my perspective and more of a technical perspective. Another pet peeve, which I think a lot of sort of sports scientists and data scientists will resonate with, is just really poorly formatted spreadsheets. Sometimes I get sent data, and this has literally happened to me within the past 48 hours, but I still collaborate on some research projects. And if the individual's watching, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But received a spreadsheet recently, which was just dog's breakfast. And it's I think one of the things I learned very early, and particularly my time at Volt, is the importance of data hygiene and maintaining really clean data sets that are easy to follow, easy to understand. So it's always a little bit of a pet peeve when I get sent data that I just can't make sense of and need to spend hours cleaning up before I'm able to actually work with it.
And what about a favorite way to spend a day off?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I think like when you work in sport, it's quite intense. Long days, long hours. It can be pretty stressful. And I think, one of my former bosses always said it's really important that you have your three big things in life, and family's always going to be one of them. Work is always going to be one of them. And then your third big thing in life, it needs to be something completely unrelated to work or family. Um, and so, yeah, I guess for me, like, love music, love playing guitar. I'm very average at it, but that's okay because it's a hobby. It's something that distracts me from, something separate to family, something separate to work. But yeah, I guess outside of that, I also have a 5-year-old German Shepherd, very active, keeps me on my toes. So on days off, we love going and exploring new places. So that keeps me pretty busy. But I guess more so in 2025. A lot of my days off have actually been spent at the physio clinic or in the gym doing some pretty significant rehab because I loved playing basketball. Again, domestic men's basketball on a Wednesday night was a bit of an outlet for me, but ended up doing my ACL pretty badly. So I've been. Yeah, I've been rehabbing that for the last 12 months, and it's been a little bit turbulent. I've had a couple of follow-up surgeries as well. Um, but looking back at it now, it was actually a really good experience because I've sat on the other side of the fence in terms of having a long-term injury and going through that process. So it's actually given me quite a bit of insight. It's taken up a lot of my free time, but it's given me some really good insight into what our athletes go through. And we had a couple of ACL athletes on our list at the moment, so I feel a bit of kinship with them, and we often get into the gym and do our rehab together. And I'm back running now, so I look forward to going out and getting on the track and going for a trot with them as well.
Yeah, nice one. Jesse Green's just sent in a question. As it relates to decision making, are you recording the instances where you intervene and why you intervene? Question.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question, and we definitely are. So, I guess an example is from a screening perspective. So all our screening data, our screening processes, in terms of our groin squeeze, we do an isometric hamstring pull as well. So anytime an athlete flags and we intervene off the back of that, that's recorded pretty in a fair amount of detail by the physios in their notes. So we have a system whereby the physios will enter notes whenever an athlete flags, and whenever they intervene off the back of that, they record that. So I guess that's just a really good process because then if anything eventuates off the back of that, or that progresses into anything further, all the steps that have been taken up to that point are very well documented. So yeah, that's definitely something that we do, and we will always go back at the end of the season. We'll go back and review those instances, and we'll discuss as a group as to whether it was successful, or there's always some instances that are unsuccessful as well, and we review them. What could we have done better in that instance? But then off the back of that, that really allows us to review, again, specifics in terms of like screening. So on a Monday morning, we'll go back and review our screening and did it work for us? So did it pick up what we needed it to pick up? And when we did intervene, most of the time was that successful? And if we ever got to the point where we feel like it wasn't successful and it wasn't picking up what we needed to pick up, then we would change that process. But at the moment, we're pretty comfortable with how that operates.
Mm-hmm. No, fantastic. No, good question. Thanks, Jesse. What about what is one belief or a popular opinion that you hold that sort of goes against mainstream thinking or popular consensus?
That's a good question. Certainly don't want to be too controversial. Probably going back, I think I mentioned it before around, I think a lot of people sort of on Twitter and LinkedIn sort of, talk about how sports science, you don't need the coding, the data science skills. It's not about integrating new technologies into sport. It's about working with athletes' decision making. And as I said, I don't disagree with that. I think that's absolutely the foundation of sports science. But we're at a point where we need to adapt or perish. Again, going back to AI, improved technology. It's only improving and it's only evolving exponentially. So as a sports scientist, I again encouraging students going through their undergrad degrees at the moment, whether you want to be an S&C coach, whether you want to be a high performance manager, whether you want to be a sports scientist, even if you want to go down the physio route and work more in that medical space, learn how to code, learn how to work with data, because it's only going to become more prevalent. I don't know if that's a controversial take. Maybe a lot of people agree with me. But yeah, it's probably a pretty strongly, it's a belief that I hold pretty strongly. So I just, the bottom line, or the final message is just, learn how to code, learn how to work with big data, because it's a really valuable skill set, and it's only going to become more employable.
And last one, mate, what are you most excited about for 2026? Obviously, we're at the pointy end of 2025, middle of November of this recording. What are you most pumped about for next year?
Yeah, I guess, again, sort of circling back to what I touched on before, but new high performance manager, new strength coach. We got some new processes, some new systems in place. I'm really excited to see how they continue to evolve over pre-season for us. And I'm really excited to see us reap the rewards of the hard work that we're doing now, what we're putting in place. And we're really excited for season 2026. As I touched on before, season 2025 wasn't ideal for us. And we've reviewed that heavily. We've made some changes. A lot of what we had in place, we have strong belief in. But having those new faces amongst the group and those new ideas, those new philosophies, some different systems, some different workflows, seeing how they continue to evolve, and also having those new faces continue to challenge me personally, but the group as well. That's definitely what I'm most excited for in 2026.
Yeah, hopefully it's a great year for the Bombers and yourself,
Fingers
mate.
crossed.
Fingers crossed. Thank you for your time and also sharing with us both your research and work experience in your career so far, mate. Great to dive deeply into AFL sports science and how data is informing decisions and workflows and ultimately making life easier for everyone around you. For those that want to connect, mate, maybe have some follow-up questions, where's the best place to connect?
Yeah, probably just LinkedIn. Contact. Just always hit me up on LinkedIn. More than happy to catch up and have a chat with people if they're interested.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, for those listening in, we'll add Josh's LinkedIn link in the show notes, so you can connect easily there whenever you park the car or finish up listening to this podcast. Our next live episode is with David Gray, which is next Wednesday. So that's going to be 8:30 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, the 26th of November. So I look forward to seeing you guys then.